my fault, I'm afraid, sorry.
You want me to start again, so by restating the answer or a question?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. about
Please
that.
do.
Apologies.
The dominance of the.
So the question that I was being asked was that, A, did I agree that Selfridges would be dominant? I think this is fair, dominated following the proposals. That'd be one part of the question. I said, no, I don't, and I've given a reason for that in evidence. And the second was a more specific comment, sir, about the call it canopy, but I think properly a cornice to the building. And you may indeed have it open. I think it would be useful, sir, now that I've referred to go to that image and just to force evidence. Appendices that we had out earlier. I'm hoping you have it open in the tab or. And this is.
Where was it in his?
Yes, it was in his appendices, page 170's photo.
Yeah.
That was at the end, correct. So I don't have, like many, I don't have the proofs with CD references. So
No, that's fine.
okay, thank you. But so the point I was, and I think it's a useful contrast as between my figure 4.19, which is Pilber's CGI, obviously, and Mr. Forshore's 22. And I think there was a very specific point about the relationship between the cornices and in fact, sir, it's a very good point because you see if you, again, comparing them in the mind's eye, in sort of our historical way, visually, you see that the cornice of the Selfridges building, before shows evidence, projects quite considerably. It is strongly modeled with dentils and console brackets. Critically, it's perceived with a entablature underneath it, or an architrave, partly speaking, which itself is very deep and strongly modeled with, I call them escutcheons or shields. Then you have the lower part of the entablature, again, reinforcing and creating a very strong and dominant, this is the features are just above the ionic volutes. And if you think about it, sir, that is a cornice and entablature that is probably more than a commercial floor deep in terms of its scale. So that is, I don't know, let's just say 3+ meters, maybe get it on for 4. You can see the build up and depths of things. Now contrast that, which is a powerful and heavy sculptural feature, with Mr. Pilber's form in my figure 4.19, which comes to a very slender edge. Have it, sir. Yeah. Comes to a very slender edge or upstand. And then its soffit is got a sort of molded timber face, which gives it a delicacy in relief. And then I think I should call them mutuals in the language of classical architecture, but the projecting brackets themselves taper to that very fine edge. So that whilst, sir, you would see the underside of that projecting cornice, they would be very lightly detailed and critically in timber, as opposed to stone, Selfridges. And I think what the eye would perceive would be that leading edge, so the horizontal vertical upstand element, which is of course much thinner than equivalent features in the Selfridges entablature. So that's why I don't think it will be dominant, and why, and of course bearing in mind, sir, that that heavy entablature to Selfridges I've just described continues unbroken for about 155 meters, and the cornice on Selfridges and the cornice to the proposed building along this frontage is upwards of 75 meters or so. The dimensions of the lengths are in Mr. Pilber's evidence. I just want to use the memory, but it's there or thereabouts. So it's much heavier, much deeper stone, and twice as long. And I think on those facts alone, I don't see how it dominate. It's a very lightweight feature. Oh, there's the shadow gap underneath. There's the fact that it's the floor. But we need low for sense of this air space. I made that point, sorry.
One document, a couple of documents that I forgot to add to my list at the beginning of Dr. Mueller, which were some of the application drawings. CD 1.5, which is the existing drawings, and then CD 1.6, which is the proposed drawings.
I might need the help with those.
Yeah.
Are they in the volume? No. Yeah, can I ask?
I'm sorry,
my
my
team.
it genuinely wasn't deliberate to
No, I'm
mention
sure.
them for my first
No,
issue.
no, of
I
course.
just completely forgot to mention them,
But given the bad luck I'm having on the website, I don't want to.
So these are the lists of drawings.
Thank you very much.
and the drawings themselves. Yes.
So it was one, so CD 1.05.
Both of those core documents are a series of plans.
That's right, followed by the drawings.
Yeah, I've got those now as a bundle.
Okay, so CD 1.5, which is the existing, you turn to the very last plan in that pack, and it should be titled GA existing section, section BB looking north.
Yes, yep.
Are you there as well, sir?
Yeah.
Just coming up.
Yes, let me just orient myself on the plan. This is a section, yes, it's a section through Orchard House, isn't it? Yes.
So we have Selfridges on the right, Orchard Street, and then Orchard House.
Mhm.
And we see
Yeah,
On the-
sorry, give it going.
on the left-hand side, we have a number of numbers for the FFL. Which we think is-
Yes.
Yes.
And you'll have to read them out to me and I'll take your word for it.
So what the one that I'm interested in is the 5th floor, FFL plus 46.180 meters.
Plus 46.180.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And
So that's the
floor
5th
being-
floor.
Yeah.
And if you follow that dotted line through all the way to the right of the building,
Yes.
you see just above that is the cusp of the corners, the Orchard House corners.
I'm just looking very carefully here. Hold on, because there's a building in the background. isn't there?
Yeah.
Rather than. So when
The
we
corners that
we
reaches
might
out.
ask, we clarify, when we say cusp of the cornice, do we mean a section through the cornice, which is sort of triangular projecting?
Yeah,
Yes, okay, thank you.
and it's just above that line. So
Yes.
let's call it
Oh, 47.
47
Oh,
or 46.5. I mean, I don't, we don't need to be exact, but
sure.
and we see also, if you follow that line along, that the cornice of Selfridges is exactly in line with that.
Yes.
So if we just note that 46.5, say, for the cornice height of Orchard House, we then look at the application drawings, CD 1.6, and this plan, don't think they're numbered, unfortunately, but the electronic page, sir, for you is 43 of CD 1.6. And Dr. Mealy, I know
Is this the equivalent section?
it's the equivalent section, yeah, and it's named GA proposed section, section BB looking north.
Just give me a moment.
It's just going to take a bit of time to find it. It's about 3/4 of the way through the bundle.
Yes. Okay.
PDF page number is 43.
And I'm assuming it's exactly the same section line.
Yeah,
Ah, yes, the sections are at the back of the bundle, aren't they? So section B, yes, do you have it, sir?
It's just coming up.
Yeah.
It's a very large file.
Yeah. It's got a drawing reference of 0002, I think, is that correct? In the
yes,
lower
that's
right.
right.
Yeah,
002.
sure. Mhm.
You there as well, sir?
Not quite. Told it to go there, but we're still thinking about it.
I think it's margin, might be marginally in a different place, this section, actually. Because I think so, this is marginally in a different place. Slightly, this section is slightly to the north of the as existing section one, because I say this, Mr. Fraser won't mind me making this comment just because it directs you, the equivalent cornice and entablature section from Selfridges is not reproduced on. this.
Yeah.
That's right, isn't it? If I may.
They're different, and it's one of the things I was going to ask is why they're different. But I'm assuming you don't know.
I'm the wrong person to ask.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, perhaps someone in the
I mean,
MS team knows the answer to that.
Yeah, I get that one.
But the point that we want to just ask you about is if you look at you call it a cornice, we call it a canopy. If you see where it lines up, see there's a dotted line just above, kind of at the top of the top of the canopy, and you follow that along, that says it goes along to the 6th floor, FFL plus 52.39.
Sorry, that is 5th or 6th?
Sixth.
I'm just, does he think that? Canopy, I think that can only be the canopy detail.
I think it has to be.
Yeah, okay, and can you give me the dimension that you can see? I can't see it.
It's 6th floor, it says FFL plus 52.39. But if that's obviously the top end of the canopy, so let's call it 52. So we've got 46.5 meters for the existing cornice, 52 meters for the proposed. It's therefore hopefully common ground that the difference in height between the existing cornice of Orchard House and the proposed canopy is something in the region of 4.5 meters.
Yes. Yes, I'm happy to accept it. About a commercial floor, which I could build on.
And therefore 4.5 meters above Selfridges.
Yes. Above the equivalent.
Above the canopy, because we saw previously in the existing that they're
Yes,
in line.
I think that's right.
So it must be 4.5 meters above
Yeah.
Selfridges, probably. Okay,
There or thereabouts on.
there or thereabouts. And of course, there are going to be judgments to make about Historic England's description of the building as strident, the canopy as strident. We had a look at that in your, that was explored in your evidence in chief, and we'll leave it to the inspector to reach a view on that. Last question on the canopy. You accept in your proof of evidence at 4.90 on page 32 that the origins of these features and the language and sensibility of classical architecture may well not be obvious to many people who visit Oxford Street. And I may say that's certainly not something that I, as a layperson, recognised. And perhaps I'm just like every other person who's going to visit Oxford Street. But that of course does have a bearing on how much weight can be attached to the classical references that are being imputed.
I did wonder when I wrote that if I would be taking to this very point. So look, and this goes to how I guess we engage in what might seem to some an artificial exercise around these points. I'm only looking at these issues from the point of view of my expertise, and I'm engaging with an architect who has similar points of reference. But if I were to put it another way, how many people looking at Selfridges would see the really innovative structural rationales I describe? Architecture works at different levels. I think what matters about classical references as interpreted in modern language is whether or not they're integrated into the overall design of the building, which then becomes, I used the word previously, cohesive yesterday. I think it's an important word. It's a word used about design in the London plan, actually. And it's often the case, in fact, last time I talked to Mr. Fraser, there was a similar case where there were some historical references that had been subsumed into a form, and you think, well, you might have to work hard to deal with that. I think we have to look at these things in two ways. I think you have to look at the overall, obviously, look at the overall architecture, shape, form, character, the building image. Then, if a building design has what I would call content, the content here is resemblance or mimesis. That's the whole point of that 1753 diagram. That architecture has an origin in something that is natural. That's then another layer of interpretation. To me, really successful pieces of architecture are pieces of architecture that one can more than one level on the other measures. And the fact that it might not be obvious doesn't take away from that. For example, I mean, architects have to start somewhere anyway. Designing a new building, and a historical reference that might be obscure but important in the history of architecture, definitely filter into their thinking, and that influences them creatively. And that's one of the fascinating things about working with architects, actually, is the way they transpose those sources into a different approach to something. So I don't take it as a negative, really. I think I'm saying is the building has a sort of rich, it's the product of a sort of richness of architectural thought, which goes to its overall quality. And the second point really certainly is observation. Think about the differences in dimensions. And my only point there, sir, is that obviously there are elevational and sectional drawings which show one thing from a certain perspective, but it's the visual material by way of the perspective views and CGIs and so forth, which are dimensionally accurate and which give an impression of obviously relative scale. So you can have correspondences of building height datums across in real terms. You see them, even if the differences or the heights are different. And that's in this case because, of course, there's a street separating Selfridges from. And the design of the building, apart from emerging lots of technical considerations, was influenced, as Mr. Pilber has explained, by precisely that, call it townscape, but sort of visual appraisal and correspondences. So I think that notwithstanding the difference in height, there is a satisfactory read across the gap of orchards.
I'm surprised, Dr. Milley, that it's you who brought up our previous exchange rather than me. I'm being very polite in not referencing it. But, okay, so that's the question I wanted to ask about the canopy. Then on top of the canopy, we've got the setback stories. And if we take up your figure 4.17 on page 31, it's clear that the setback stories are still clearly visible from street level.
I
Notwithstanding,
I do beg your pardon,
4.17.
Oh, yes, of course, yeah.
Yep.
Yes, of course, when you come
It's on
to
the
the
ground,
corner, yeah.
visible. There's a
Of course,
canopy.
it's fact.
Canopy will have an effect on the visibility of those setback stories from certain angles, but from many other angles, those stories are still visible.
That's absolutely right, sir, and it's a very good image to, I think, indicate the way, pardon me, the cornice line, because of the shadow it creates, provides sort of terminating feature in the composition and relates really well to the gridded masonry frame below it. From this point, which is probably getting out of an maximum, the most you would see in the building, articulation which works in two planes at this point helps to create an acceptable skyline profile, which is of course enhanced by the fineness of detailing and the integration of landscape. I think so that obviously this is an image where the target is exactly the impact and not in fact what one would normally perceive in these situations, which is a much broader and wider street scene. Yes, and I think, as it's my understanding as well, also sir, that one of the reasons for the what I call sort of syndicated pattern of the southern setbacks was precisely to deal with this kind of condition. So that there is sometimes people resort to just setbacks on their own. They often don't have architectural coherence. Sometimes they can appear a little bit bulky. I think, as I understand Mr. Pilber's evidence from talking to him, there was always an awareness that this southern upper elevation needed to be handled particularly sensitively and carefully because of its exposure from positions like this, in addition to the fact that articulation enables a series of external terraces, which really add a huge amount to the quality of office accommodation, attractive which I understand is part of the architectural and evidence that goes to the quality of the building.
And we know that Historic England aren't a fan of these additional stories. If we look at their CD 4.4, page 3, second paragraph, 3 floor levels above, which present a cluttered roofline and would be visible in several key views of Selfridges. This would cause the proposals to distract from and diminish the latter's preeminence in the townscape, causing harm to it. That's Historic England's view. And not a view with which you align, but nonetheless, that is what their position is. And I think what I want to just discuss with you is a general observation that you make. For example, in your proof at 5.41 to 5.44, where, to paraphrase you, you say that the scheme enhances Selfridges because it's a companion flagship building with a striking modern design that will enable one to better appreciate the novelty and the power of Selfridges. The bold is better, school thought.
But I think particularly in this case, sir, because of the difference in grain that exists between the buildings. Again, I offered you some observations yesterday about the strength of the bay module on the Selfridges building, the depth of relief. And in my rebuttal evidence, I do make the point, probably my main evidence too, that the gridded facade has a fineness of scale. And I actually think that the contrast between the two makes you perceive the merits of Selfridges. And this is the, I mean, it's a bit like complementary colors, and you appreciate red more when it's next to green. So that it isn't just about boldness, it's also about a different approach and highlight some of the really salient qualities of good buildings. So in all, for example, all across Soho, you come with, or indeed even in Mayfair, more to the point, you come across instances of, really good 1760s first phase development of Georgian townhouses, and there'll be this really interesting infill from the late 19th century. And compare and contrast the old art historical thing about how you understand style and character. So I think London is full, this part of London in particular is full of those sorts of really interesting contrasts. And to stay with the point on Mayfair, of course, where that Georgian architecture, 1760s, is as plain as can be, because even though it was elite, there was a sort of almost Protestant dislike of external display, sort of British Palladianism, it was a little controversial anyway, which in fact, unless your attention is drawn to it, sometimes by contrast, I think most people would sort of overlook. And I find that I don't think I'm alone in finding those sorts of contrasts adding to the appreciation of one's architecture. And I say that also as someone who, for a time, brief time anyway, at the start of their career, taught art and architectural history. That is exactly the technique you use to make students aware of the defining characteristics of styles and artists. So I see it in exactly those terms.
In respect of Orchard House, earlier in the cross-examination, you said, to quote you, that the contrast between Orchard House and Selfridges is profound. And if that's the case in relation to the contrast between Orchard House and Selfridges, then presumably the contrast between these two schemes, the new scheme and Selfridges, is significantly more than profound in your view. Is that correct?
I don't know what is more than profound, but I mean,
well, that's what I'm getting at. Where have you got to go after that?
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, look, I mean, there is a contrast between the two buildings. There's no question about that. They're very different. But from the point of view of certain aspects of conception in there, they're both having a basis in structure to an informed eye, with some explication, careful study and understanding. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that depth of contrast, profundity, that depth of contrast is harmful. Just is one really terrific thing. And now, in my opinion, if consent is given, there'll be another really good thing.
Yes, and in this in that sense, that this question of whether the contrast is to be criticised or celebrated, that's really the central question in heritage terms in this whole case, isn't it? Because it's accepted. You've just said that they are very different buildings, and so the question is, does the inspector align himself with your evidence that celebrates that contrast, or does he align himself instead with, for example, Historic England, who have said that there should be a quieter cornice, less scale? Portor, who says that there needs to be a building like Orchard House, which is suitably deferential and non-competitive. And that's the debate, isn't it, to be resolved? That's the central question, whether to celebrate or criticise the contrast. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree with that, sir. I mean, central, in my judgment, the real heritage question here is the impact on Selfridges, because it's an asset of the highest caliber and importance. I mean, you say there aren't other really important weighted impacts to consider, but I think, sir, this point of context needs to be put in context. So can I invite you to take up my rebuttal evidence?
Certainly.
It's CD 10.13. I think this phrase probably has it out. You may have it on turn at all. And I invite, if you got it, sir.
One second. Okay. Yeah.
If you go to page 15.
Yeah.
So the contrast that we're talking about takes place at the far end of a 150-meter long facade. From this perspective, where you see the whole of Selfridges, the proposals have no impact. And likewise, because of the, oblique nature of the laws, the oblique nature of the view, from the other direction, by the time you come to see the whole of this elevation of Selfridges, Orchard House is a feature to one side. So the contrast where it occurs is relatively local. It leaves the whole of this vast facade untouched in your perception of it.
In the interest of time, Dr. Moody, I'm not going to ask you any questions about the impact on Portman Estate conservation area. We know what your view is. We know what Mr. Porter's view is. Just a couple of quick questions on the Mayfair conservation area or associated assets. Do you accept that the site contributes to the setting of the conservation area as per Historic England's comment? Page 1 of CD 4.4.
I think I do, yes. And there's a similar comment in the HTBIA, actually, I noticed when I was reviewing that. I think, sir, it contributes in this sense that as you walk north, up North Audley Street, the sites, Portland stone facing particularly, and its scale, and its obviously commercial character, seen in conjunction with Park House, which is also commercial character and like kind of marks the change in townscape scale from Mayfair to Oxford Street, which, from in townscape terms, are different character areas. And so, to that extent, I think the existing building is legible, or introduces some degree of legibility into this area. But so would also the proposed building, anyway. And in fact, it builds on that contrast when it comes to change in character. And I think as you move up, sir, from the sort of hinterland watches to the Jackson Conservation Area, it may indeed important state, get to the north of those south streets, and Oxford Street is, you become very aware of Oxford Street. Change in sort of just general levels of footfall, change in uses, sort of mixed commercial to more, or which should be more detail, obviously, normal retail and office. So the building does, I think, fairly signal that at the moment, yes. But I don't think in that walk to the north, sir, it particularly provides a pendant to Selfridges, because, you know, if you're on the east side of the street, you don't really, not really very aware of North District, not really aware of Selfridges at all. And on the west side of the street, you're not really very aware of the existing building or the site. You see more Selfridges.
Last point, Dr. Neely, is in relation to something that Historic England say in their consultation response on the 4th page, under the heading, so it's the CD 4.4, under the heading Historic England position. And they say, recognise Orchard House as a non-designated heritage asset which contributes positively to the setting of Grade 2 star listed Selfridges, which we've already talked about. Framework sets out the desirability of conserving all heritage assets, whether designated or not, and demolition would be a regrettable loss. We consider that the proposals potentially represent a missed opportunity to retain the best parts of the existing building through its reuse and adaptation. And then the paragraph, this could enable a more sustainable form of development as promoted by the framework, with the positive elements of self-control setting being preserved. Such a solution might also be more sustainable in an environmental sense, as indicated by your authority's emerging guidance, the latest Heritage Council research also highlights above. So there, Historic England are bringing together the two points that SABE are making in this inquiry. Firstly, the heritage concerns, and also the concerns about the missed opportunity for a retention of the best parts of the existing building, reuse, sustainable adaptation. And that's a conclusion which we can add Historic England to the list of people to this inquiry who've been promoting that particular point of view.
I mean, and it is Historic England clearly are aware of the debate that existed around this point. But so when you read any letter from the Secretary of Constantine, in my reading anyway, there are parts of it that have more weight than other parts of it. Historic England's regret, sort of a noted word here, is in the context of an alternative not in front of them. And as a consequence, I don't see on what basis significant weight could be given to those comments. And indeed, then when you turn to their recommendation, which is the final page, they say they return to, as it were, to their statutory brief. So recommendation, page 5 says, yeah, are you there, sir?
Yeah.
HE has concerns regarding the application on heritage grounds as they say, and they get back to home base here. Setting of Selfridges, okay, we know that disposition is setting of Mainfair. So the essence of their advice to the City Council is within their statutory remit. Those other comments are not within their statutory remit. They also refer in their position to the authority's own emerging guidance. Of course, this authority took that guidance into account when it resolved to grant planning permission. And finally, English Heritage's Historic England's recommendation is basically for the planning authority to take the representations into account. The planning authority did and didn't seek amendments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Neely.
Just one or two points. The CD81 to begin with, you were taken to an extract. Do you remember?
This is the Westminster City Council statement case.
Yes, you were taken to an extract from the book. And it's a proof of page 75 in internal. I don't think you need to go to it unless it's readily to hand. I'm almost grateful. Okay. And you looked at the typeface and the nature of the book, and you said, Pevsner, remember?
Oh, we have to do this.
Yeah. Let's just see about that, because Pevsner's very often quoted in inquiries such as this, and also relied upon by the Secretary and Secretary of Inspectors. If we go back to page 64, we see it's not Pevsner at all.
Oh, no. Sorry.
It's The Face of London by Harold P. Clem, who was a shipping agent.
Yeah.
And wrote a series of popular books about the face of, so the face of London, the face of Brighton, the face of Cardiff. First of all, Harold P. Clem, or the Pevsner series, in terms of weight and the way in which it's been dealt with by inspectors, etc., do the two compare?
He's not a noted architectural critic or historian. He's a popular.
Just look at the first page. He does walks.
Yes.
Obviously not as posh as Pevsner's perambulations, but just look at the way in which he writes. Although it is today one of the finest thoroughfares in London, Oxford Street, and the most popular shopping streets in the British Empire, 60 years ago it was a rather shabby thoroughfare, consisting principally of third-rate houses, practically all of which have since given way to splendid modern buildings. So
Yeah.
it speaks of tiresome centres of traffic congestion, etc. In those contexts, the weight that you say the inspector should give form his own conclusion clearly, but insofar as this is relied upon to the suggestion that Orchard Street has a positive and significantly positive relationship with Selfridges building.
I think it's a limited weight, really.
All right. And let's see what Pevsner really does think. To be fair to my learned friend, he didn't paint that as Pevsner, but you looked at it and said it was. We've got what Pevsner actually says at page 27 of your proof.
Yes.
433, which is at page 467 of Inspector's Pevsner City of Home.
Get that right.
Paragraph 4.33.
Yes, got it.
The pilaster Marks and Spencer by Treherne and Norman was W.A. Lewis shows clearly what a convinced single-minded design Selfridges was.
Yes.
Agree or disagree?
Agree.
Inspector will make his own mind up, obviously, but with which judgment do you side? Pevsner's or Mr. Harold P. Clem, shipping agent?
I think Pevsner is generally regarded, sir, as something from authority. And I make pointed evidence, sir, about the drafting of the building to begin with. This one is undertaken by Simon Bradley, who I retired as the general manager of Bradley. But when the survey, when the building victims were looking at the old Pevsners, they looked carefully at some of the judgments, and they drew some of them across where they thought they conveyed both judgments they agreed with, obviously, because when they don't, they qualify that, but also where the drafting, in their view, had a sort of particular literary turn that, one appreciates in Pevsner, because they wanted to keep some of that tone. But it isn't just a kind of homage when that happens. It's been a deliberate attempt, to consider and pulled across.
Thank you. Next heading, say believes this site should be in the conservation area.
Yes.
I just want to understand what the Secretary of State and the Inspector is meant to do with that. Is it in the conservation area as a matter of legal fact?
No.
Would it be appropriate to treat it as if it were in the conservation area as a matter of legal fact?
No.
You? Is there any suggestion that the extent of the designation as it stands is legally faulty, as you understand it?
No.
You? Let's look at the requirement on the local authority. Again, as you understand it, we can make legal submissions. Good to hear from the council, maybe. If, as part of its consideration of this application, or indeed the very many number of other applications in and around Oxford Street, if, when considering those matters, the local authority formed the view that the tests necessary for a site or a building or an area to become a conservation area had, as a matter of fact, been met, what would the Section 69 duty require them to do?
Not to amend the boundary.
Is there any suggestion in this case that they come close to finding that there is such a requirement?
No.
Have you read the officer's report, which is also in?
I have.
Yeah. Is there any suggestion in the report that somehow the conservation area as identified is or even maybe incorrect?
Nonetheless,
Very much. You said to Malone and Friend that you thought that these matters had been through a review. And he said, well, we look very carefully, we don't see that. I don't know exactly how to do this. This is the first time I've done an inquiry of this nature. But if you type in variously to the your internet search, Westminster City Plan Heritage Evidence Topic Paper, which was, I think, the document that you were referring to, or background, what did you call it?
I evidence-based.
Evidence-based. All right.
Heritage evidence, yeah, that's the first thing that comes up.
It is remarkably, it's the first thing that comes up.
Just evidence.
Okay. Are you there, sir?
I haven't been doing the search. Do you want me to do that now?
Well, it is, I think that.
Or is it a core document?
It's not a core document because I'm really rising to Malone and Friend's invitation to point to it if it exists.
Heritage evidence.
Yeah.
The short document, about 43 pages.
Depends on the
PDF.
Correct.
And do we see, look at the date on it, City Plan 2019-2040, Heritage Topic Paper updated November 2019.
Recent.
Well, certainly at beyond the time when pre-application discussions were in this case. There's an executive summary. Need to go there, I don't think. There's an introduction which explains that this has been brought up to date, 1.3, amended with an addendum to set out reasons for any changes to policy, etc. Minor typographical errors. Westminster's adopted heritage policy is set out in 2. 3, there's an overview of legislation, policy and guidance. And it says this: an important consideration in developing policy is ensuring heritage policy is up to date and has responded to the various changes in national and local policy context. Sort of things that Learner Friend was putting to you. Our statutory duties in relation to heritage and all key international, national and plan policies and guidance have been reviewed. Our statutory duties in relation to heritage and have been reviewed to make sure we fulfil requirements set out in legislation and policy. Some of the issues identified in policy are set out. Fuller extracts and lists of key policy documents in relation to heritage and local plans are attached as Appendix 2. So let's see what they've been reviewing. I've got hyperlink Appendix 2. My documents just disappear.
Yeah. So the
Yeah. So view of key policies, guidance, heritage.
Appendix 2. And do we see under legislation, review of key policies and guidance, under the heading planning, section 69 provides the legislation that allows local planning authority to designate conservation areas and requires that the authority reviews the areas designated.
correct.
So have they had regard to that on the face of the document in ensuring that their policies as a whole are up to date?
Yes.
Right. Is there any suggestion there that the extent of the conservation areas, which are expressed throughout the document as being 78%, I think I've got that right, 77, 78%. Is there any suggestion there that the conservation area extents are out of date or incorrect or need review?
In that selection, I've been shown is that they discharge the duty. For therefore, they reviewed their areas as I suggested. What would be required as part of the local plan process.
Thank you very much. Next case, building itself.
We finished with that document.
Yes, we have.
I think it should be made a core document.
Yes, I do. I agree.
Please, and if the council wants to make any commentary.
Thank you very much. It'd be an APP document, I think.
Yeah.
So, great. Next heading is the building itself. You were asked to look at 2 cross sections, and you pointed out that they weren't necessarily the same cross sections.
That's right.
Right. Now, this is a matter of fact, sir, I certainly welcome it being sort of outside of the inquiry.
Okay.
Because it was put to you that there was a relationship between the cornice of what was proposed and the top of the Selfridges. Do you remember?
Correct. Yes.
And a dimension was put to you, and you said, "Well, I take your word for it. I agree. It's there or thereabouts." Can we outside of the inquiry make sure that we've got that between us all right? Brilliant.
Another paragraph or a note to the statement.
That would be brilliant. Because I'm not sure that the exercise that was undertaken in the way that it was is actually correct. But I may be wrong, but it's a matter of fact, so we can agree.
So we will in that.
Good. Thank you very much. Good. Next, this one. Classical references. Who knows, who cares, who notices? Remember that line? All right, right. Listen, in order to... Well, let's see then. Let's see what you say about this, because...
Let me just get the question now.
Yes, the question is, classical references.
Who knows?
Who cares?
Who cares?
Who notices? Yeah. Well, apart from those in the room who enjoy that sort of thing, as a member of the public, do you have to understand the Grand Ionic Order to appreciate the quality of a building that has or employs the Grand Ionic Order in an appropriate way?
No, of course.
No. And if a building follows well understood, well appreciated architectural principles that have lasted for eons, whatever you call them, whether you know that it's an indenture or whether you know that it's a column or whether you know that it's a capital, if a building follows well understood, well appreciated architectural principles, all other things being equal, is it more or less likely to be a good quality piece of architecture?
Or more likely, because those principles are formulated on the basis of human perception, understanding, and defined.
So, whereas the man on the Clapham Omnibus,
Sorry, I missed the end of
Yeah, I think
As
more
formulated.
likely, yeah, as format, yeah, because those principles reflect general perceptions of aesthetic beauty and quality as we evolve them through human perception over thousands of years, getting monumental stone architecture.
thank you. I'm sorry, sir. And let's assume you're a man on the Clapham Omnibus or a woman on the Clapham Omnibus, or my little friend Mr. Fraser, who doesn't
Doesn't take a
Doesn't take the month.
gets his chauffeur.
I cycle with him in Harrison. I don't know about you.
No, I didn't cycle here this morning, for sure. I don't really wait for this. But the serious point is, Mr. Fraser might not study Palladio or Alberti, but why do all architects have to?
Well, because those theses and treaties and ideas contain and crystallize the underlying principles of beauty and proportion. And it provides them with, essential tools when it comes to composing buildings.
You read a lot from Historic England, and we know from the letter, I don't think you went to this part of the letter, but they identify impact and they identify harm to Selfridges, but they say it's at the lower end of less than substantial harm. So we've got this compass of decisions and classifications. You take the view, as you've explained, that because of the removal of the execrable buildings that are there and the places and the spaces and the photographs that we looked at yesterday, and the relationship between the two buildings, that there's an enhancement.
Yes, that's fine.
Yeah. Then we've got Historic England with their constituency of interest, taking the view that there is harm, but it's at the lower end of less than substantial harm, and therefore forced to be avoided.
And are not, yes, and there are not.
Well, that's my next point, and they don't object. we know from personal experience, and the inspector will know that there's a range of responses from HE. Here, they've left it to the local authority. In other cases, they object, and in yet further cases, they insist on a call-in. So that's the range there. Save, on the other hand, put the impact on Selfridges somewhere between the middle and upper end of impact to the designated heritage asset. How credible is that, please?
Well, I don't want to comment in particular on the other expert, but all I'll say, sir, is that if that were right, that would be fundamental change to the ability to appreciate what's special about Selfridges or some attribute of it. And I just don't think any impact, the impacts we're contemplating can even remotely do that. But if you form the judgment that there is one.
Thank you very much. Thanks, so those are my questions.
Thank you. And Mr. Brake, to check my questions virtually all answered, just one bit arising from that. Talking about whether Oxford Street should or shouldn't be a conservation area. If it were designated a conservation area, what impact would that have on other conservation areas in the area?
Well, it would, I think, sort of split off those parts of those sort of hinterland conservation areas into a new conservation area. So the area of land designated would remain the same, I think. Because the city council has taken a very careful view, and as I understand it, in drawing boundaries in those, I call them hinterland areas, of going to the middle of Oxford Street in some cases. So, for example, they're particularly pertinent here. We saw them on site. There are these 4 urban blocks at the southern end of the Portman estate that run from this one right the way over. Well, 3 of those urban blocks, the west, are included in the Portman conservation area, and they are buildings of Oxford Street. And this side is Portman land, yes, but they're included because they're part of the conservation area, because they're part of the Oxford Street, and because of their intrinsic or their architectural structure. But I don't think we change the boundary, because this interaction with Oxford Street has been taken into account. We're drawing up the current boundaries.
And what about the significance?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's all my questions. And the council has heard what's been said about conservation areas, if you can comment or not. Right, 20 to 1. The programme now is to look at conditions and the 106. Would it help to break for lunch early and look at this? It's going to take us more than 20 minutes.
I think so, sir. I'm entirely in your hands in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, so we'll do that. Then I have I got the latest draft of the 106 that we're going to refer to?
I think so, sir. I certainly know for the conditions that it's in doc CD 81, that's the conditions.
Right.
And I think also, oh, no.
The updated version was sent to the planning inspectorate before the inquiry started. So if you receive that, then you should have the most recent version
Of the 106.
Right. And sorry, so the conditions are in the updated statement of common ground, which is CD 10.1.
So which version are we going to refer to? 8.1 or 10.1?
10.1.
10.1. Okay.
There is I think it might be an earlier version of the section 106 in there too. And I'm looking to Roy,
That's correct. Yeah, I mean there are very minor changes.
Okay. And so the 106 was sent to Pence. Do you have a date of that email?
I believe it's the 20th.
Yeah, 20th.
Splendid. Okay. Then we can all be looking at the same page. Right. So let's break for lunch. So if that's all we're looking at this afternoon.
I think so, yes.
We can keep lunch short then and perhaps give him at 1:30.
Yes, already,
Yeah. Couples one is fine.
That's fine. Thank you, sir.
We'll adjourn now and resume at 1:30.
Inquiries addressed.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's fine.
Right, Elsie.
I think something perhaps the inspector wanted for his unaccompanied site was a map. Can we draw that up?
Sure.
So we can give the inspector